Hello and welcome to my second user interface video. In this video I'll be going over some of the things I did not go over in my previous video, which I will put a link to in the description below. Things I will be going over in this video are some of the extra add-ons that are not included with ElvUI, and some of the other features of WeakAuras, or the main parts of this video that people are going to be interested in. Alright, this video may go long. My last video was about 25 or 30 minutes or so. I would not be surprised if this video ends up going over an hour. So I will try to put some quick links in the description as well to like some of the different parts of the video, because it's going to be broken into sections. But hopefully if you watch the whole video, all your questions will be answered. If not, then you can feel free to comment below with a new question, or send me a YouTube message, and I will try to get back to you with those. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the questions I received was, what add-ons do I use? Like, can I see a full list of what the add-ons are that you use in your interface? And here we are. This first add-on actually is Add-on Control Panel. And this is the one here. It basically allows me to turn on or turn off add-ons while I'm in the game. And I don't have to log out to switch add-ons or turn one on or turn one off. I could just go over here and, like, if I wanted to turn this auctioneer add-on off, I could just click it and then just hit reload UI and it would turn it off. Wouldn't have to log out to do that. It's a really convenient add-on. I mainly got it for when Blizzard allowed us to use Preform AV, but they broke that, so we can't use that anymore. But it's still a helpful add-on if you wanted to turn on or off something without having to log out every time you wanted to do that. It's actually a really helpful add-on to have. But it also goes over, it lists all the add-ons that I have as well. So let's go through those. So the first one here is Archaeology Assistant. It just throws up a box for, it's helpful for archaeology. Auctionator is good for auction house whoring, and Bagnon. The only reason I use Bagnon is, like, I still actually use the ElvUI basic bag system, but Bagnon will let me, it puts better tooltips than ElvUI does, basically. So I don't actually use the bags for it, I just use the tooltip information. Like, going in here, I don't actually use the guild bank or the void storage or anything like that. I just use the configuration, so I can see in the tooltips, like, how many each of my characters have of an item or something like that. It's just a good, I think it's a better bag add-on than most of the other ones out there, and that's why I use that. Battleground Targets is a great add-on for PvP. What it basically does is it'll put all the enemy team in, like, you'll see raid frames for them basically, and you can see if they're a healer or a tank or a DPS and what spec they are and their name and how many people in your group are targeting them. It's just really helpful to see you know, what you're up against. It's a really good add-on. I highly recommend it if you PvP. Bug Grabber and Bug Sack. This is this little green bag up here. It basically catches all those Lua errors that pop up in the middle of the screen, and it hides them so that it doesn't pop up in the middle of, you know, a raid boss or anything like that. And then if it's a green bag up here, it means you have no bugs, yay. And if it turns red, that means it's been catching some bugs. And you can actually click on that and it'll bring up this this box here. Like, this was a bug I had before, and you can actually send bugs to people to try to get it fixed and all that. Alright, let's get back to there. Buy 'em All is a neat vendor add-on that will let you shift right click a vendor item, and you can go above the usual Blizzard limits of like buying one stack at a time from, like, a Blizzard thing, or just buying one of an item that you can't actually buy multiples of with a Blizzard interface. This, you can actually shift right click and it has buttons like max or a stack, and max will let you buy as many as will fit in your bag. You can just do a stack and it'll automatically buy however many is in one stack. It's a really helpful add-on to just streamline the purchasing process. And, okay, chat check search pack. That's something with ElvUI. I don't actually have it set up on my Warlock, but on my Druid, it's basically like a picture in the background of the chat. It's really just cosmetic. You can get this at tuckui.org, and you can see how to do those on there. Deadly Boss Mods is my preferred boss mod. There's nothing wrong with bigwigs or whatever other ones are out there. I just prefer Deadly Boss Mods because it's what I've used since Burning Crusade. And I know how to use them. I like the way they look. I like the way it works. And so you could use any boss mods of your choice. But I do recommend you use boss mods because they are helpful for reminding you of things that are coming up and keeping you on your feet. Okay, in ElvUI, this is the main add-on that I use other than WeakAuras for everything you see. I mean, ElvUI is the chat boxes, the unit frames, the action bars, the data text, the mini-map, this bar over here, the auras, the top things up here, even this bar over here that I'll get to in a minute. That's all ElvUI. I have customized it slightly from its default settings. I've moved some things around, and we'll get into that in a little bit once we get out of this part here. Alright, and add-on skins. This is how I get some of the add-ons that aren't part of ElvUI to look like they are part of ElvUI. Basically, ElvUI has a lot of the skins built into it, but some of the add-ons that have come out since ElvUI has been released aren't part of ElvUI to be able to be skinned. So this add-on just basically broadens the amount of add-ons that ElvUI can skin. This is how I get my WeakAuras skin to look like they belong in ElvUI. I get a lot of questions about that, and this is the add-on I use, is ElvUI add-on skins. Alright, so ElvUI currency LDB. This is a currency library database. Basically what this is down here with where it displays my gold. If I hover over it, it displays all the golds on all my characters, and for the session it'll show the earned and spent and the profit margin if I have one, either positive or negative. The reason I use this excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, but the reason I use this is I like to be able to see all my currency in one tab instead of having to look at like several different tabs on the Blizzard user interface to be able to see what I have on this character. Like I can hit C and then go over to currency and it'll show me my valor and justice and my gold and these miscellaneous things, but it won't show me my conquest and honor there. It won't show me my archaeology fragments. I just like to be able to mouse over here and see everything. That way I know without having to open up the honor screen and the character screen and my archaeology screen to be able to see what kind of things I already have. It's a really helpful add-on. It's preferential too, so it's not something you have to have. It's just something that I use because I like having everything in one spot. Okay, ElvUI data bars. Some people have asked me how I get these bars up here, because these are not part of the default ElvUI. This is the add-on that I use to get those, basically. It's a combination of data bars and ElvUI Location Plus plugin. The top one here is Location Plus, and what it does is it basically tells you what zone you're in and gives you your coordinates, and then these two data bars next to it are optional. This I use for my Pirate Speak. I can click that and turn it on and off, and this is I use for my Windows, not Windows, but WoW Instant Messenger, which I'll get to later. And then this bottom one here is just an extra top data bar that I throw up there, and it has a spec switch. I can click this and it'll activate whichever other spec is not active, and it's just a really easy way to switch specs. And then it's got 2 data bars on the side of it too. One's for, I think, raid DPS and one's for raid heals per second. So that's what those 2 are. ElvUI Enhanced. This is an enhancement for ElvUI, as you know, would make sense by the name of it. It basically adds some features to ElvUI that aren't built into it. One of the ones is this bar up here. This is basically a mini-map bar. Most of the time add-ons would show around the mini-map over here, but what ElvUI Enhanced has is it has a mini-map bar that takes all the add-on buttons and puts them in a bar instead, and you can move that bar anywhere you want. And I chose to have it over here. You can have it horizontal, like I do here, or you can make it vertical if you wanted to, and you can move this anywhere. And I just like, that's the main reason I got the enhanced plugin. It also has some other features. I can't remember all the ones off the top of my head because I really only used the minimap part of it. But I know it has auto release for PvP. Like if you get killed in PvP, it'll automatically release you, so you have less of a chance of missing a resurrection. But that's one of the other features I know it has. But it has like 10 or 12 extra features that aren't built into ElvUI. So it's worth checking out, just seeing what features it has and if those are relevant to your playstyle. Alright, and then ElvUI Visual Aura Timers. This, if you look over here at my buff here in Grimoire Sacrifice, most of the time in the defaults, it would actually have the time under it. It would say, 1 hour or 40 minutes or 41 minutes remaining, so it would be like 41 minutes under here. It replaces the time with a bar. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to keep this, because sometimes I do like to see the amount of time without having to hover over it, but I think the bar looks cool, so I'm toying with the idea of turning it off, but that's what that does. And it's not, I don't think it's in any of my videos yet, but that's what that is for. Alright, EPGP Lootmaster, that's just what my guild uses for raid loot. It's a good way to organize and keep track of who gets what loot and who needs what loot. Gatherer, most people already know what that is, so I'm not going to go over that. Healers have to die. This is a good PvP add-on as well. This and Battleground targets are the 2 must-haves for PvP. Healers have to die. Basically what it does is it puts a healer sign, like the little plus sign, over a healer, so you know which enemies are healers and which ones aren't, and that way you know to kill the healer first, so that they don't keep healing the people who are killing you. It's a really good add-on, highly recommended if you PvP. Mixed scrolling battle text, I went over in pretty much great detail on my other video, but this is where you see my outgoing damage and my incoming damage and healing. That's the add-on I use for that. If you want to know how to set that up, go to my other video and look at that. I won't be going over this in this video. Alright, move anything. Move anything allows you to move anything. Anything that's, static, at default, you can actually move it to wherever you want to. It'll still be static, but you can change where it pops up. But you can actually change where it pops up. So the main thing I use this for is the PvP statistics that are on the top of the screen, like if you're an Arathi Basin or something, and you see the score up here, and the score would end up being behind these data bars, so I just use move anything to bring it down a little bit so I can still see them. You can move anything from the character screen to achievement frames, anything you want to with this add-on, but I only use it to move those battleground information things that are up here. Alright, NPC Scan. It is a neat add-on if you want to hunt rares, basically. It will basically play a sound, and this frame will pop up down here, and you can actually click it and it'll automatically target the rare NPC. And it's helpful if you farm for rares, like if you're a hunter looking for a certain pet or something, or you're just looking to try and get some achievements, or the timeless proto drake or something like that. It helps you find those a lot easier. An NPC scan overlay basically puts this overlay over the minimap, and it also will like color the minimap as well, as far as the zones and where they are, so you can kind of know where to look for them. Overachiever. Overachiever is an achievement add-on. It makes it easier to track things, like for instance mousing over this bandicoot, you can see in the tooltip down there that it has a little achievement sign and already /loved. That way I know I've already /loved this for an achievement. If I didn't, it would say need to /love, and it just helps you out with things like that. It also adds a better search function in the achievement frames, in the achievement UI, I should say, not the frames. And it also allows you to like save lists of achievements you're tracking, and it's a good add-on to have if you like achievements. Pet tracker is what I use for when I'm going out and pet battling and things like that. It shows you where you can find pets and how many pets you still need in that zone, things like that. Pirate Speak is one of my favorite add-ons ever. It basically takes anything you type into chat and translates it to make it sound like a pirate is saying it. That's what I have up here. The Pirate Speak add-on is off right now. So if I say LOL, it's just going to say LOL. Turn it back on, say LOL again. Me sides are splitting in laughter. Arr. So it's a really neat add-on, and I really enjoy it. Some people in my raid team don't enjoy it as much as I do, but they have to suffer through it anyways because it's awesome. I'm gonna leave it on. Let's go on. And Postal is what I use for my mailbox. It allows me to open all and open some and automatically like take out gold that I've earned from the auction house or something like that. And it's a neat add-on. There are other ones as well. I just use Postal because it's skinned by ElvUI. Reforged Light. This is a good add-on to use if you're not really sure how to reforge. And even if you are, it streamlines the process. It makes it a lot easier to figure out what the stat weights are. It has a lot of like presets for your class and your spec in it. They're usually pretty accurate, but sometimes, like with warlocks, as you get higher gear, your stat weights kind of change, and other stats become more valuable than previous stats. And but it's a good way because you can actually put in the stat weights that you want it to follow, and it'll automatically reforge your gear accordingly. It has a whole interface that you can use at the reforgers. It's just really helpful. I highly recommend it for people who want to really get that extra few points out of their character. Alright, Shaw of Fear Assist. If you've seen our heroic Shaw of Fear kill video, you'll notice that when we're on the platforms, I have this pie chart down here that has like some yellows and green and red colored pies, and that's what that add-on is basically. It basically lets you know where the safer spots are to stand on that platform at the time, because the spray does hurt a lot on heroic mode, and it will kill you if you get hit twice in a row. So you need to make sure you're in a safe zone, and that add-on is basically something that reminds you of the patterns that they use. The other option is just memorizing the patterns, and some people do that, and that's what people had to do before the add-on was available. But with the add-on, it makes sense just to use the add-on to remind you of where you can stand. Alright, and Skada. Skada is what I use for my damage and healing meters. Recount, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a little more process heavy because it tracks practically everything. So I mean, if that's something you want to be able to do, recount is definitely the option for you. But I like SCADA because, one, I can have two different, I could even have three or more different things being displayed at the same time, so I can actually see the damage and the healing. I can have two different windows. Recount, I'm not sure it can do that. At least when I used it before, it couldn't. And the other reason I like SCADA is because it's completely modular. You can actually turn off things you don't care about, that don't interest you in knowing. Like, I don't really care about the enemy's damage done or taken, or the debuff uptime, or crowd control, or power, or threat. I don't really care about that stuff. I just want to see the healing and the damage mainly. Sometimes damage taken, or deaths, or dispels, but those are the main things I want to see. I don't really care about the other things, so I can turn those off so it's not tracking those and slowing down my computer processes. That's why I use SCADA mainly, and also the multiple windows that I can see. Alright, so social state. I actually got this question recently, and social state is this data bar up here that has my friends and guild in the same spot. And basically the reason I use social state is this tooltip, or this Dropbox basically. It displays all my friends, and if their real ID, I'm going to block that out just for privacy's sake, but it shows their real ID, so I know who they are. It shows which character they're on, where they're at, what realm they're on, a note that I have in here, and then my guildmate, the guild message of the day. But the main thing about this that I enjoy is the options down here. You can actually click on a person's name. Like I can, let's see, I can click on somebody here, and it'll actually open up a whisper window. And this is WoW Instant Messenger, which I'll get to in a little bit. But and I can also alt-click, and it'll invite them to the group. I can control click and edit the notes, like the notes I have over here. If I was an officer in the guild, I could do it on these guys too. But it's a really neat add-on that kind of just puts all your friends and guildmates in one display, instead of having to go through a bunch of different tabs on the normal Blizzard interface. But that's what social state is. TomTom is an arrow add-on basically. It displays an arrow. You can put a waypoint on your map, and it'll show an arrow on where to go. I use it in conjunction with my archaeology assistant, so that it'll basically track where the next archaeology dig site is, and then put the arrow on the screen so I can just fly that way and not have to really open my map. It's it's a convenience add-on. It's for when I'm feeling lazy, which is when I usually do archaeology. Alright, and then WeakAuras, which is probably the reason you're watching this video. We'll get into that in great detail here, but that's all the stuff that pops up on my screen. Those are all WeakAuras. Okay, and then WoW Instant Messenger. I have a bad habit of calling this Windows Instant Messenger because it's WIM and the same initials and all, so I'll probably end up messing that up sometime in this video. But that's that window you saw recently here. Like, this is Windows WoW. there we go. WoW Instant Messenger, and it acts like an instant messaging program in, like AOL Instant Messenger or Yahoo or MSN or whatever one you use. What I like about it is that, for one, it puts everything in a box, instead of in another chat tab over here. It's where I have to keep on clicking on different things. It actually puts them in boxes, and there'll be tabs like this, and you can hide them in combat. You can make them show in combat. There's a bunch of different options for them. But it also will let you see the history. So if somebody showed me a link before I logged out or something, and I didn't see it, then I can actually go back and bring it up again. If somebody was letting me know how to do something, and then I need to go back and find out how to do it again, I could go back and do that with the history and all. It's basically an instant messaging program in WoW. It has all the features of any other instant messenger. Alright, and that's basically all the add-ons that I use. The other ones, like the ones that are kind of logged out, I kind of installed but didn't like. Ugly lazy. I turn on when I need it, but that's pretty much what I use. I used to use PowerAuras, but now I use WeakAuras because there's more you can do with them. That's pretty much it. So that's gonna conclude this part of the video. I'm gonna go get a drink because my throat is dry as hell, and I will be back, well, before you know it, really, because it won't take long. Alright, I will be right back. Alright, and I'm back. Alright, so in this part of the video we're going to go over some of the changes I've done to the ElvUI defaults. I went over a lot of these in my other video, but there are some changes I've made since then, so I'm going to go over those specific changes. To find out the other ways I set up ElvUI, please visit the other video, and we will go over those there. But to get to the ElvUI setup, you can actually go over here to the C and left click for the configuration, or you can type /EC and it'll bring up the configuration as well. Alright, ElvUI recently developed this pixel perfect option, and I think it makes everything look a little bit cleaner. The borders used to be thicker, and I actually enjoy them being a bit thinner. And you can still see the outlines and everything, but it just looks better in my opinion. So I turned that on. It is a preference thing. This is my minimap skin buttons, and with the ElvUI enhanced, to bring this over here, it just puts these extra options here, and you can have the horizontal anchor bar, the vertical one, or you can turn the bar off completely. And they can change the button size as well, make them bigger, larger, smaller. I put it at about 28. These are the other options like PvP auto release, auto track reputation. ElvUI doesn't do this on default, but basically whenever you gain a rep, it'll automatically start tracking that. I have my rep bar over here. That's one of the ElvUI enhanced options. I think the other ones are pretty much built into ElvUI, but actually I'm going to turn that off. And let's see. Yeah. Okay, so the main thing that I've really changed since my last video is the raid frames for my group and party. They used to be like the 25-man frames here, but only... turn this off in a second. But my 10-man frames used to be like this, but just with only 10 of them instead of 25. When we got into Heroic Terrace of Endless Spring, we got into situations where I needed to be able to see debuffs on other people in my group, and the ones in the middle just weren't cutting it. They either weren't displaying what I needed them to display, or they weren't displaying anything at all. So what I did is I went and took the party frames, and I pretty much just copied those and made slight adjustments to it. Because I knew in my 5-mans, when I was doing challenge modes, I could see all the debuffs that I needed to see. And so what I did is I literally just pretty much copied number for number the party frames to the raid 10 frames. So the width, the height, and the group point I changed to left actually on there. But the only difference is the max columns, and I changed some of the offsets a little bit, and the units per column. I could have probably actually changed that to make it 10 and then 1 column, but either way you do that, it's going to be fine. The visibility I kept the same, so it's only going to show the 10 people who are in the raid itself. So if you have more people like sitting on the bench outside their instance, it'll hide them so you don't see things you don't need to see. Alright, so that's the main thing I've changed. But let me show you how to get these things up here. Alright, so like I said, it's a DT bar. It's on the DT bar add-on for ElvUI. And the only one I've actually turned on is the top data text bar, and that's this one up here. And the other one up there is Location Plus. And then you can change the settings for like the tooltip, what you want to see when you mouse over there, and the layout and everything like that. But that's the top bar here, the location one, and the DT bars is the top data text bar up here. And then you just go to the data text, and it'll actually have it in here, top center data panel. And then I've got spec switch, RAID DPS, and RAID HPS. So that's how I got those up there. It's just extra add-ons you can throw in there. And that's pretty much the changes I've made to the way ElvUI looks. Pretty much everything else is the same. Again, you can just go to toggle anchors and move anything you want. And you can do different configuration modes. Like you can do just the action bars. You can do everything, so you can see everything that's there. I have moved the cast bars a little bit, mainly the target cast bar. I made it thicker, like thicker as in the height. I've increased the height so I can see it a little bit better. And I moved the focus cast bar up here because I need to interrupt on protectors of the endless. Other than that, those are pretty much the changes I've made. So let's go ahead and lock those and close out of that. So that was actually a quick section. Now let's get into the meaty bits. To get to WeakAuras, you just type /WA, and it brings up WeakAuras. I'm going to turn these off. I'm not turn them off, just hide them. But you saw all those auras there. Whenever you bring up WeakAuras, it's going to show all the auras you have. I can actually show like the different sections. Basically, I like to use groups for everything, and I'll go over the difference between groups and dynamic groups and the different aura choices pretty soon here. But just to go over my reasoning for it, these are my CCs. Like if I fear something, or Shadow Fury, I have one for Mortal Coil, for Havoc. Basically these are things that I want to track on targets even if I'm not targeting them. And I'll show you how to set those up. But that's what these are here. These are my dots, debuffs, abilities that are usable on the target. Like these are for my affliction dots. These are, that's Doom for demonology, Conflagrate for affliction and immolate, or not affliction but destruction and immolate as well. Havoc for destruction, Haunt, Seed of Corruption, Curse of Elements, Curse of Enfeeblement, and Curse of Exhaustion. This is Shadow Fury, I think, for Demo. Then down here I have buffs that pop up. These are mainly ones that are like trinkets that activate or cooldowns that I pop, or something I get in the middle of boss fights. Like this one's for Stone Guard, this is for Garajal. These are Jade Spirit potions. I think that's Power Torrent actually. And then just miscellaneous buffs. I've ended up putting some of them on this side too, but for the most part I put them down here when I need to track like which buffs I have or something like that. This big pulsing shield is Spell Reflect. I use that for PvP. If I'm targeting a warrior and he's got Spell Reflect on, that pops up so I know not to throw a Chaos Bolt on him, because it'll just come right back at me. And this group down here is, I'll show you it in a little bit, but it's basically a visual indicator of when I use an ability. It's mainly for people who are watching my videos so they know what I'm doing when I'm not casting a spell or doing something like that. But like if I'm life tapping, it'll show this life tap symbol really quick and then it'll fade away. And the same with the health stone. Something that I recently did. It's a new thing. You might not have seen it in many of the videos yet, but you will in the future. And here are my executes. It's basically going to display whenever the target is at or below 20%. For the Shadowburn one here actually, and the Scary Fog is just for Heroic Leishi, I put it there because that's where I look when I want to do more damage. And these are more important buffs that I want to track a little bit closer than the ones that are down here. Things like weak points for Heroic Garelon, Purified for Protectors of the Endless. This is supposed to be Fearless Sunshot of Fear, but for some reason it doesn't work. I haven't really tried to fix it though. This is Backdraft for Destruction, Molten Core for Demonology. This is Corrupted Essence for Protectors, Destabilized for Emperor Shaper. Just a couple different things that I want to keep track of and have more visible than down here. They're typically longer buffs and pop up here, and these are usually related to the actual fight instead of what my gear is at the moment. And this one up here is what I started using for important debuffs that are on me. Like this one, these two are for Garajal, and these two are for Garelon. Some of the names. And there's buffs I need to track on myself, so I know when I have Voodoo Doll or how many stacks I have in Garelon and how much longer on those stacks I have. And this bar down here is a progress bar, and it basically shows how long my Dark Moon Fair bonus / XP rep boost is active. I wanted to make it look cool, that's all. There's no reason that I couldn't look up here and just see how long I had on the buff, but I wanted to see it on the bar. And it just felt like making one. And I think it looks cooler that way. And that's basically a rundown of all these things. These are Scary Fogs, which I'll get to on myself and my focus target, because I'm usually in charge of keeping track of that. But that's what those are. And then these Waterspout, Death Blossom are text auras for events or status or events. Yeah, events. And I'll get to those too. But let's go ahead and start actually diving in here. Let's just go over the different selections here. So there's three possibilities for organizing your auras. You can have them in groups, you can have them in dynamic groups, or you can just have them sitting out here like my Scary Fog auras that I just haven't put in a group yet. Yet is the keyword. I will eventually, but I just haven't got around to it. The difference between the three is basically with the like this. Let's start with the Scary Fogs. They're just wherever you put them, and they automatically alphabetize all the stuff. So if you just like being alphabetical, you may just want to put everything in a certain spot and only in that particular spot. You can do that by just leaving them groupless. The other option, or another option, is using a group. And a regular group basically creates the group in the WeakAuras options panel, but doesn't affect the way that they're displayed on the screen. You can still have them anywhere you want, and they're in that specific spot all the time. And so that's what I'll end up doing with my Scary Fogs, because I don't want the positions of the icons changing based on how many icons are showing or what triggers happen. I just want them to be in those particular spots all the time. So that's what I'll end up using for my Scary Fogs. But the other option is a dynamic group, and that's what I use for pretty much everything else. For my bottom group here, my important debuffs, my important buffs, the CCs, the dots, and the debuffs. These are all dynamic groups, and the difference between a group and a dynamic group is the way that they're displayed. With a dynamic group, everything is relevant to a certain position. It controls the way that the icons are displayed. And what I mean by that is if we have Right now I'm destruction, but if I was affliction and I put on corruption on this planeswalk, it would basically display corruption, but it would display right in the middle here, because that's the way I have it set up. I have it set up as centered horizontal in the grow direction and the line on the center. It would show corruption right in the middle. Now if I also put on agony, it would move corruption over, and then it would display agony, but they'd be centered around this locket here. And then however many of these are active, it's going to display them in a neat line, and the positions will actually change based on what auras are active. And I like this for things like debuffs and buffs and elements like that. If I want some kind of visual indicator or something like my scary fogs, I like them to be in a static position so I know where to look for them. But with things like this, I like the dynamic group because it'll center them around a relative location. And you can change the center horizontal to circular. You can make circles like that. You can make centered verticals like I do with the important debuffs and the CCs. You can make them to go all left so that they'll build this way, or you can make them do right so they build that way. It's really a preference thing, but I just like the centered horizontal and centered vertical options. Alright, so that's the difference between groups, dynamic groups, and groupless auras. Okay, so now that we've gone over that, let's go over the different types of displays you can do. You can do a progress texture, which basically shows a texture that Blizzard has built into the game. I think you can also import your own textures and use those as well if you have artwork that you'd like to use for those. But a progress texture looks like this basically, and it shows a texture, and instead of like an icon showing the clock thingy that they do, like on the which we'll get into in a second, it basically fades out the texture as the progress of whatever you're tracking goes on. I don't like these because most of the time it's hard to really indicate the value of how long you have left of that aura. And I like to see precise times, especially when I'm raiding or PvPing. I like to know exactly when things are going to be happening, when they're going to be falling off, when I need to refresh them, and so forth. So I don't like to use progress textures for that reason. Some people may like them. They're not for me. But they're set up the same way every other one is. Like all of these options, the progress texture, the text, the model, icon, and progress bar, they're all set by the same way of triggers, and we'll get into triggers in detail here in a second, but the setup for them is all the same. It's just what you want to display that is important here by choosing these. Texture is the same thing as progress texture, but it shows a static texture. It doesn't show the progress on it. For my druid on the balance, I've got a balance restoration druid, and I've got a texture showing for when I'm in a solar or lunar eclipse, and I use that for that, except it's just a visual eye candy kind of thing. But that's what you can use those for. A 3D model, I don't use these for anything, but I'm sure you could if you wanted to. But basically, you can have a trigger set up a 3D model. It defaults to Arthas. You can choose anything you really want to. Like you can do different things. I mean, I can see the use of these. I just haven't really played around with them enough to really be able to use them beneficially yet. I mean, I think it could be pretty cool to do certain things like that. But that's what 3D models are. It's not just character models. It's also, NPC chat bubbles and icons that pop up on the heads and things like that. It's any kind of 3D model in the game, basically. You might be able to import your own. I'm not sure. I didn't look at that. But you can use anything from the game files, it says. So that's a 3D model. Text is like we were seeing with the water blossom or water spout and death blossom. And if you notice, sometime on my cast bar it'll say life tap or life tap you idiot. Those are text icon or text auras. And that basically you can display any given text that you want to display. Yeah, there are some strings you can use for that, for variable text options, and you can also put in things, something like Lava Girl takes my doll or something, and it'll display that whenever the trigger happens. And then let's jump down to progress bar really quick. The progress bar is the thing you saw down here. It's basically just what it sounds like. It's a progress bar. It's very similar to DBM or Bigwig's boss mod timer. It's pretty much the same exact thing, really. It's a little more customizable, and I do use them for certain things. Like I use them for my Rain of Fire to see how long Rain of Fire is going to last as destruction, and because Rain of Fire is an instant as destruction, and I like to see how long it's going to stay there, so that I know when I need to cast again. And then the one I use the most of are icons, and these basically display the icon of something you want to track. Most of the time, WeakAuras can automatically figure out which icon to use, and you can also tell it to use a specific icon if you want to see a specific one instead of, like if I was tracking Immolate, but I wanted to see Incinerate's icon for some unknown reason, I could do that, and I'll show you how to do that pretty soon here. But those are the different kinds of options you can do when creating a new aura. So let's go ahead and start looking at some of the ones that I have. And let's start with our dots, because these are the ones people probably care about the most. It says dots, but it's also things like debuffs and things like that. So Hunt is in a dot, Havoc is in a dot. These aren't dots, but basically these are things that I want to track that are on my target. Anything that I want to know when to cast, or that are already on the target, I put in this dynamic group. This is a dynamic group, by the way. And let's start with Unstable Affliction here. So before we go much further, let's go over the display options that I usually use. Now, when you create a new icon or new aura, it's going to default the width and height to 64. I think that's too big for my personal tastes, so I bring it down to 32 by 32. You can have that any size you want to. It's really a preference thing. But that's the size I like to use. I do tooltip on mouse over. I'm actually thinking about turning those off because they're starting to get annoying. But basically what it'll do is when the aura is active, you can actually mouse over it and it'll show the tooltip for it. For the text position, it defaults to bottom right. I changed that to center because I like to see it in the center instead of the bottom right. And the remaining time precision, I changed from the 1 decimal point to the whole integer value without any decimals. And I have the size of the text at about 15 point. The remaining time precision on like cooldowns and buffs, I leave at 1 decimal point. It's really a preference thing. For my dots, I don't really care about the real precision of it, especially as a warlock, because I can refresh them a lot earlier than most classes. But for my cooldowns and my buffs and things, I like to get a little bit more precision, so I have a better idea of exactly when that's going to happen. I think anything past 1 decimal point is kind of ridiculous, but if your eyes are just that amazing, you can actually go up to 3 decimal points in there. Alright, and then the text here, these are for icons, but the text here usually defaults to %S, but if you hover over the text box here, it'll actually show you the different strings you can use. You can literally type anything in here and it'll display. Like I can put let's do a space and put like lava girl is dumb. And actually spell it right. And just click OK, and it'll actually put that in there. It's for a small icon like that, you don't want to put in too much information, but that's what you can do with it. You can put anything in there. It'll put exactly what you put in there, unless you put in one of these strings, and it'll check for one of those things. So let's go over quickly the different options here for text. %p is progress, meaning the remaining time of a timer or a non-timer value. So if it's something that's counting down, like it has a duration to it, it'll show the remaining duration of it. If it's something like, what's a good example for? If it's like soul shards would be a good example. For %p for soul shards, it would let you know how many soul shards you have at the current time, or shadow orbs, chi power, Death Knight runes. You could have it do things like that as well, and it would show you how many you currently have available to you. The next one down is %t, which is total, and it shows the maximum duration of a timer or a maximum non-timer value. This is the same as progress, but instead of showing the current state of it, it shows the maximum state. So for Burning Embers or Soul Shards, it would be 4. For Shadow Orbs, it would be 3, etc. And for a timer, it would tell you the maximum duration. So you could actually put like a %p/%t, so you'd see the progress and then the maximum. That's what I do for my Soul Shards, actually, my Burning Embers. And, the next one down is %n, which basically displays the name. It's usually the aura name, or displays the ID if there is no name. Like if I put %n here, I think it would actually just put agony in there. So let's affliction. So let's actually try that out. Yep, that's what it does. So that's what the %n does. And %i, it displays an icon. If you wanted to see the icon, like this is mainly for, if you have like a text aura displaying and you actually want to see the icon on it, you can actually display the icon as well. %s is what it actually defaults to. It shows the number of stacks of an aura. It defaults to this basically so that it's not showing much of anything unless there's something to display stack-wise. Like for Unstable Affliction, it wouldn't show anything. But if I was using Agony, for example, Agony does stack to 10, so it would actually show how many stacks of Agony I had on there. That's what those are for. It displays the stacks, and if there are no stacks available to that aura, or that buff or debuff, or whatever it is you're tracking, it'll display nothing. It'll just be blank. So if you actually delete everything out of this box and hit enter, it'll throw %s in there. Okay. And then the last one is %c, which is a custom script. I don't know scripting well enough to be able to do any of that, but if you do know how to Lua script, you can actually, it'll throw some boxes in here that you can put some customized scripting in there for displays. So if you're really good at that kind of stuff, that's something you could do. I'm not good enough at it to do it, but that's what those are for, and that's basically how I set up the majority of my auras. The only difference being is I do have 2 auras for each dot that I have and debuff. The only difference on the display for the other one is the width and height. I bumped up from 32 to 46. That's really the only difference. It just makes it a little bigger because I wanted to catch my attention at that point. And when I see it bigger and flashing like that, and I'll show you how to get it to flash later on, it gets my attention better. So that's what I use that for. Alright, so that's basically display. And let me actually go over the frame strider as well. Inherited is basically going to inherit the group setting for it. but you can have the auras basically be in the background, have a low strata, and strata is basically what displays above it and what's going to display below it. If you put it as background, if anything pops up over this, it's going to display over the aura. If you put it on high, the aura is going to be on top of anything that pops up. So that's basically the four main ones. You can have it as dialogue, full screen dialogue, and tooltip. You can play with that, but it's basically the visibility of the aura and relevance to other things that are being displayed in that same area. Okay, so let's move on to triggers. Now triggers is where the majority of the work happens. This is basically how you tell WeakAuras to start displaying something, is by indicating the triggers for it. So there's four different types of triggers. There's aura, which it defaults to. An aura is basically a buff or a debuff. And you can track this on several different units. You can track it on a focus target, a certain group, a specific unit, multi-targets, a pet, yourself, which is player, or your current target. And then they have custom. This, again, if you know how to do Lewis scripting really well, you can actually create a custom trigger. Like I said before, I don't know it well enough to be able to do it myself, but if that is something you are able to do, you can create custom triggers. Events. This is basically checking something that happens in either the chat log or the combat log. And you can also have it track something for when a spell or item becomes available, like a cooldown is ready. And then we have status, which checks the current status of a value. Things like health, mana, range. There's a bunch of different things, and we'll get to those in a second here once we start doing some status auras. But it's basically tracking things that aren't a buff or debuff, and that aren't happening in the chat log or combat log for an event. It basically tracks everything else. You can track almost anything else with it. So for now, let's leave it on aura and go with unstable affliction and show you how to set these up. So unstable affliction, when you get to here, you can either type in the name of the buff or debuff. You can enter a partial name and then have it do the guesswork for you, or you can type in a specific spell ID. I like to do a specific spell ID, and let's actually clear this out really quick so you can kind of see what it does. So I could sit here and type in unstable affliction, and it would bring those up. And I'm actually going to go to immolate, because I can actually show you with that a lot better, because right now I'm in destruction spect. Okay, so immolate. Alright, so it's basically going to track, like if you look over here, it's found 40 matches for immolate. It's going to be tracking for any of those really, but I'll show you why that doesn't matter in a minute here. But if you type in the spell ID, which I like to do, because I like to misspell words for some reason, but ElvUI has the great functionality of showing you the spell IDs of everything in the tooltip. So I can see that immolate is spell ID 348. So it was like one of the first spells made. And you just click OK, and this box is going to pop up whenever you put in a spell ID. And it basically says, by default, WeakAuras cannot distinguish between auras with the same name but a different spell ID. However, if you use the full scan option, WeakAuras can search for a specific spell ID. And then it asks you if you would like to enable use full scan to match the spell ID. I click no for the most part, because I don't really care if it's going to be tracking all the other ones. Basically, since there are 40 matches, there's a bunch of different spell IDs that it could be tracking, and using full scan will only track the 348 version of it. As you can see, like near the bottom there, you can actually see the 348, but then there's other ones like 2294, 15661. These are all versions of immolate, and basically for other NPCs that cast these things. And then there's conflagrate, or fire and brimstone versions of it too. So it's going to be tracking all these 40, but the thing that makes that not matter is coming down here to own only. So even if it finds other versions of this, it's only going to track it if it's yours. So it's only going to track the 348 version that way. That's why that doesn't really matter to me when it goes to like debuffs and things like that. Alright, so you can use full scan. It does do a bigger toll on your CPU. Not a huge toll, but it's going to be a little bit more process heavy, and I don't like to put that burden on it as much when I don't need to. Okay, but that's how you can get the aura name in there. You can just type in a partial name, and then it'll do the guesswork for you, or type in the spell ID. And then we're going to go down to unit. Now this is going to default to player, because it's going to want to track a buff on you, really. But you can have it as different units, like focus, a certain group, a specific unit, if it's not something in your group. Multi-target, which I use for CC, which I'll show you when I get to those. You can track it on your pet, on yourself, which is player, or target. It's going to default to player, like I said before, so I moved this one down to target because I want to track immolate on my target. And then the aura type, you want to make sure you have the right type selected here. So if it's a debuff you're putting on the target, you want to make sure you're tracking the debuff. And if it's a buff, then you want to make sure you're tracking buff. Alright. Now this is a conditional, and then there's a couple different conditionals for triggers, and it's dependent on what kind of type of trigger it is. But for my debuffs, I like to do the remaining time. This is the reason I have multiple auras of the same debuff, because they're all basically different times remaining on them. So like this version, the smaller version, is just the regular, typical, I have the debuff on the target version of the aura. And I have the remaining time at 8 because warlocks can refresh their abilities sooner than most classes can. Basically, this version is only going to display when the remaining time of the dot or debuff is 8 seconds, is greater than 8 seconds. And that's how I set up the first version of the dot. And then I really just go over here and right click and then choose duplicate, and it'll create this next copy. And then the only thing I change on the trigger is the operator here, changing it from greater than to less than or equal to. So the other version is going to display when there's basically 9 or more seconds left on the dot, and this version is going to display if there's 8 or less seconds on the dot. Now you can do this if you're not a warlock, but I would just recommend lowering the remaining time. Like if you're a druid, putting moonfire and sunfire on a target, you could change the remaining time to 3 seconds or 4 seconds or however much time you think you'd need to be able to see the visual indication that you need to refresh it and respond to that. And so it's really a preference thing at that point. I put 8 because warlocks can refresh theirs at 50% and not suffer any loss from it. But other classes have to refresh theirs a little bit closer to the expiration of the debuff. So just put it at a time that's comfortable for you to be able to see it and react to it without wasting time or wasting global cooldowns. And if it's a stack debuff, you can actually have an operator for that. Like if there's one stack, you can have it small and then 2 stacks bigger and have it grow, or whatever you want to do with that. But stack count is the other variable for that an aura trigger. Alright, and then the only thing I did difference is on this one is that, like the display is bigger. It's 46 by 46 instead of 32 by 32. And I have it flashing, which I'll get to animations a little bit later in the video. Alright, and then I actually, for immolate, I have a third version of the dot, or the debuff. And this is basically the version I have for if I don't have it on the target. Because when I'm destruction, I actually have everything available showing, unlike when I'm affliction, I only have things that are actually on the target at the time. But if I don't have immolate on the target and I'm in combat, it's going to show this grayed out pulsing version of the aura. And the way I do that is instead of the remaining time, I actually have that turned off, but everything else is the same, so it's just another right click and duplicate. But down here, I turn off remaining time and I come over to inverse, and this is basically going to make it activate whenever the given aura can't be found. So this is how I can tell if I don't have immolate on the target. I know I need to cast it at that point. I don't do this on affliction, like I said, but I do it on destruction because there's only the one dot. The way to get it grayed out like this is on the display. Just come down to desaturate, and that's how I get that to show there. Now, whenever you do an inverse on the trigger, you do have to come over to display and indicate which icon you want it to use. Otherwise, it's just going to show a question mark or this green box. Like if you remember when I was displaying all of them and I had that green box over here. If you don't specify the aura or the icon after you do an inverse trigger, it's not going to display the icon that you want to show. So to display that icon, you just come over here to choose, and you can just start typing in the name of the spell. Like I'm just typing immolate. Then it's got the different versions of it: Twilight immolate, Fel immolate, and Fire immolate, basically. Then there's this other one, I guess, engineering, tier 9 4-piece bonus. Okay. So you just come over here and just click on that, and it'll automatically tell you the icon name. If you know the icon name already, you can just type into the box in the other screen. But you can just click on that and hit OK, and it'll automatically put it in this display icon field. So whenever you have an inverse trigger, you do have to indicate which icon you want to display. Alright, so that's basically how to set up a debuff tracking, like an aura track, or an aura trigger on a WeakAura. You can do that with other things, like let's go to my buffs on the bottom here. And these are pretty much set up the same way. The only difference, let's do heroism, and this is actually a good example, but it's just the unit's a player and the aura type is buff instead of debuff. And I don't do only because it's tracking them on me, so I'm only going to see the buffs that are on me anyways. But this is actually a good example of tracking multiple buffs with the same aura. Like with heroism, there's heroism, and there's time warp. You can do bloodlust. Then there's like the ancient hysteria, I think it is, with the hunter pet. Whatever they've called that, you can track that in here. You can basically do multiple auras for the same trigger if you wanted to, and it would display that. Like if it's time warp, it'll show the time warp icon here. If it's heroism, it'll do the heroism icon. I don't have the hunter pet version of it in here, but you could put that in there and it'll display that icon if that's what's active. And there's just, it's the defaults here. It's a player, and I'm tracking a buff on myself, so that's really the only difference between the buffs that pop up down here. So instead of being a target debuff, it's a player buff. And that's basically all that is. So those are actually really easy to do as well. And it's the same way with the debuffs that are up here. It's just instead of a target debuff, they're a target or player debuffs. Like the ones up here, let me get to those really quick. Like doing crossed over, it's just a player debuff. And you type the name in. Same way, own only. I usually end up putting own only on most of these, just because I want, in case some freak accident makes it track somebody else's. But they're all set up the same way. They're all aura triggers, and it's just basically depending on what unit you want to be tracking it on, and whether it's a buff or debuff. That's really the only difference between these things. And the conditional arguments down here you could change to whatever you need to do. Important buffs are the same way. Backdraft for destruction. Same concepts here. Molten core. It's just they're all auras, and they're all buffs or debuffs, so they're all done the same way. So you should be able to make those. Obviously these are different sizes. This one's 64 by 64. For the ones that are like on the sides here, and then my execute phase, and then the debuffs over here, the CC and things like that, they're all 64 by 64. I leave those big because usually they're more important, and I want to make sure that I see them. Alright, so let's move on, and let's do the Burning Embers here. Like Burning Embers and Soul Shards, and this is basically a status trigger. And let me show you the different things you can do with the status trigger. So, like the type here, it defaults to aura, but moving down to status, and then you can click on this drop box here, and it gives you all the different statuses you can track. Most of the time I'm using something like action usable, or cooldown progress on something, or health, or power, shards, shadow orbs, threat situation. I actually don't use that one, but for this particular one's Burning Embers, you can do alternate power, G power, combo points, crowd control, Death Knight runes, demonic fury. The list goes on and on. It's basically tracking a status of something. For this particular one, it's Burning Embers because I'm in destruction right now, and the unit is myself. You can track it on anything else too. You can track it on the target and see what their power is or the health is at. And I'll show you something like that when I get to the execute ones that are right after this. But then that's all I have for this one. And then I go over to display. Now this is a text aura. Like when you come over here, this is text. Like this is one of the ones that I've done with text. And this is the difference on the display screen for it. So right now I've just got %P/%T. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where it's not a timer value, but it's a non-timer value, but it's going to display that I have 10 Burning Embers right now, which is basically enough to cast one Chaos Bolt, or one Ember Tap, or one Fire and Brimstone. 10 Embers, or 10 Embers is basically one Burning Ember. I don't know why they had the multiple numbers, but, well, I do, but that's not important. I'm going off rabbit holes here. Alright, but basically it's going to show me the current number that I have right now, and then the maximum amount that I could possibly have. And it's just at the space slash because I just put a slash in there. And that's why I get those shown. It's the same way with the Soul Shards. It's literally the same thing, except for the status trigger being shards instead of Burning Embers. So you could do this with a Shadow Priest with Shadow Orbs. You could do it with a Druid with Eclipse Power. If I was Demonology, I could do Demonic Fury. If you're a Death Knight, you want to see how many runes you have available, you could do that. If you're a Warrior, you could do Fury or Rage or whatever it is. And then Rogues could do Energy. Those are all alternate power, basically, or power. And power basically tracks mana or rage or energy, things like that. And we'll get into those once I get to the life tap ones here, which will be pretty soon. Alright, but that's how you set up something like that. Like if you want to see the current and maximum values, that's how I do that. It's just %P/%T. I do have a space between like %P space slash space %T, so it has a little bit more distance between them. But it's the same way to do the Soul Shards, and I've got questions on how to set that up. So that's how you do that. Alright, let's move on to the execute phase. Now, executes are actually universal, at least for like different classes and everything. Like the only thing you might need to change is when it starts. Like I'm pretty sure most execute phases start at 20% if your class has one. If it's not 20%, you can just change the trigger starting point. But let's get into how to set this up. Like, this is my drain soul one, and you can set up any icon for that, and you actually have to for this one. But let's go over the trigger first, right? This is another status trigger, and we come to the status, and instead of doing the burning embers or action usable or anything like that, we come down to health, and then we come down to the operators for health percentage, and the operator being equal to or less than. So when he's at 20% or lower, this aura is going to activate. And then, like for statuses, we're not tracking specific spells. At least not with a health status. If we were doing action usable or cooldown progress, it would be a specific spell or item. But in this case, we're not actually tracking a specific spell ID or item ID or anything like that. So we actually have to tell this that we need to display a certain icon. And it's done the same way as before. You just come over here, choose, and you just start typing the spell name you want to show. Or if you know the name of the icon already, then start typing that in. And that's how you can get that in there. You can put any text you want over it, like execute, or you can do %n for, well, you don't want to do %n because I won't show it because we're not displaying an ID. But you can type anything you wanted there, like execute, or if you're affliction, you can do drain soul, or whatever it is you want to do. That's how you would set that up. That's how I do my executes. Because some people were having some confusion on how to get that to display. That's how you do it. It's basically a status trigger for health with an operator of the health percentage. And then you just tell it which icon to use. I've got it flashing, which again I'll get to when I get to animations. Alright, and the same with Shadowburn. It's literally just a copy of Drain Soul, but I just changed the icon. And then this one activates when I'm in Destruction, and Drain Soul activates when I'm Affliction. So I could have the same one for both of them, and just have a static icon, but I like to see different icons, so I just made a copy of it and changed the icon. Alright, so moving on, let's do some cooldowns. Let's see, where are those? Why are these not displaying? Okay, these should be loaded. They're not loading. Okay. We can actually do it from here, I guess, too. But cooldowns are done a little bit differently. I want to go over this because they are status triggers. And we're on status triggers now. So basically for my cooldowns, I have two different auras for each of those as well. So the first one I have is the cooldown version of it. And I do have a little bit of a different display, but I'll get to that after I go over the trigger options on it. But basically it's a status, and then you just come down to spell cooldown progress. And if it's an item, then item cooldown progress. And then you just type the name of the spell in or the spell ID, and it'll do that. And then for the display, I actually come over to the color here, and I actually bring the transparency down, or the opacity, whichever way you want to think about it. But I can break it down to about 50%. And that's what makes it kind of darkened out a little bit, so that I like the look of seeing it darkened out when it's on cooldown, because then I can see the cooldown progress of it a little bit better. And then I do have it as progress, and like I said before, on the remaining time precision, on cooldowns I like to see a little bit more on when those buttons are going to be ready to press again. So I do have the 1 decimal spot there. And let's go on to the next version of it. And it's basically right click and duplicate, and the only thing I'm changing is the cooldown progress to action usable. And then on the display I've changed the opacity back to 0, or the transparency back to 0, so it's fully colored in. And then the text is a %s, so it's not displaying any text, or if there's stacks, it's displaying stacks. that's the basics of my spell cooldowns. Items are a little bit different, so let's get to one of those. Let's go to health stones. And a lot of people can get the cooldown progress of an item done pretty well because it's actually just on there and it's easy to find out. But some people have asked me, how do I get it to display when the cooldowns are ready, like when the action is usable, basically, because there's no item usable status thing. But the way that you do that is you literally just come to the cooldown progress version of the aura, you right click and duplicate, and then you come down here and just click inverse. And that's all you have to do. And that's how you can get it to display when those are available. With this particular instance, you don't have to give it a specific icon to view. I don't know why this version of it isn't. Like usually whenever you inverse something, you have to specify a certain icon. But for some reason, with health stones and items, it doesn't make you do that. But it's really simple, really. It's just a duplicate and then inverse. And that's how you get those set up. And that's pretty much all the cooldown stuff. Alright, so let's go to the next section here. Again, I don't know why those are in the not loaded section, but anyways, let's do some CC. Because these I do have as multiple target auras. Kind of go back to the aura triggers, but this is for like when multi-target. Basically, this is going to display whenever I have fear on anything. Like if I come over and fear this Plainshawk, and then target this dead Sungraze Mushan, then it'll still display the timer over here, so that I can still know, okay, this fear has, 4 seconds left on this Plainshawk, so I might have to go back and fear it again, or do something else to it. I have this set up with pretty much all my CCs, with like my Shadow Fury, my Mortal Coil, my Fears, my Horrors, Howling Terrors, things like that. They're all displayed here. Like you can kind of see here, Banish, Banish is here as well. Nightmare, if I've got Havoc on somebody, it shows. Nightmare is something that, I think it's a glyph we have actually, but it makes something slow. Those are like the different CCs basically, and that's how those are set up. It's basically the same thing as a debuff on a target that would display here, but it's for multi-target, so it's going to display even if I don't have that particular targeted. It's going to display and let me know how long I have on it. That's the beauty of multi-target. I also have that for, let me see if I can pull it up here, buffs, important buffs, for destabilize, because on Amber Shaper, it actually, there's a point in which you want to destabilize both Amber Shaper and Zoc and the Amber Monstrosity, and this way I can track them on both the targets and know what's going on. And for this I actually used a percent stacks, like a stacks and progress, so I can see how many stacks they have on them and how long they're going to last on them. So I know if I'm in the suit, I know which target to go and hit and destabilize on, and if I have time to hit them on both targets while I'm in the suit. But that's how you set those up. It's really neat with the multi-target. You do have to be careful with it. Because you can start seeing other people's, like if you looked at when I was on the CC one, I do have own only checked on these, so I'm not seeing other people's fears, because I want to be able to track mine. That's why I'm seeing these. Alright, so let's see, what else do we need to go over? Alright, let's do the Scary Fogs, because this is going to show you how to do a focus unit, or units that aren't target a player. Like with this version, like with Scary Fogs, I have basically some to track my own, which is player debuff, and the Mind Show over here. And then I have these over here to display when I'm on my focus target, so that I know the other person, whoever it ends up being that night, I know how many stacks they have and how long they have on their stacks. So this is a good example of setting up a focus or a tracker, or trigger. Same way as if you were tracking them on yourself, same settings down here, the only difference being the unit. But you can actually do that as a focus. Now, if it's always going to be the same person, or let's say you want to track, like let's say Drudez has a hard time remembering to be in Moonkin form or something like that, you can actually come down here to specific unit and track it on a specific person in your group. And you can just type in the name of the person. And it only works for party members, so you have to be able to track somebody who's in your actual group. Otherwise, you have to do a specific unit. Otherwise, you'd have to set up a different kind of aura. But that's how you can do it on a specific player. Like you just type in their name there. But for this one, it's just a focus, because sometimes it changes based on who's in the raid group that night. And sometimes the other person might die and have to focus a different target at that point. That's how you set that up. It's just an example of a focus or a trigger. It's really the same way as a player or target, you're just changing the unit. Okay, so let's go to the mana group here. Now, this is a good example of multiple triggers for the same aura. So like this is the first version of my life tap reminder aura. This is basically what goes off when my mana is starting to get low, but it's not critically low. And it starts saying, hey, you need to life tap, you know. It's yellow, it's kind of alerting, but not really in your face alerting. And it's there, it's right over my cast bar, so that I can see, like if I do this, it's going to show over my cast bar. It's alerting enough so that I know, hey, I need to life tap, but it's also not intrusive enough to where it's kind of annoying, and the other version is for that. But the way you set this up, this actually has multiple triggers. So the first trigger here is a status trigger for power, and then you come down here to power type and it's mana. If you turn this off, it just tracks whatever power you have at the moment. But this is a mana trigger, so it's specified mana because I wanted to. And the first trigger here is the power percentage is greater than 25%. So normally, if this was the only trigger, this would always display, and I don't want it to always display. So what I did is I came over here and did an add trigger, and then it creates a new trigger, an additional trigger for it. And it's just the same thing, status, power, player. This one I didn't do mana type. It shows you that you don't need to do that. But then I also did the operator of less than 40%. So basically this aura is going to display when my power is less than 40% but greater than 25%. And just to scroll up here really quick, go to required for activation. There's two options here. There's any triggers, and then there's all triggers. So you can actually set up multiple triggers for the same aura to pop up and have any of those triggers activate that aura. For this one, I've done all triggers because I want to make sure that I'm within that range. So I want all the triggers to be true before this displays. So I want my power to be less than 40% and greater than 25%. So I want both of those to be active and true for this one to be displaying. You could do this with, if you wanted to just do multiple triggers for the same aura, you could do any triggers, and then whether it was trigger 1 or trigger 2 or trigger 15 if you wanted, it would display that aura. And you can make it even more precise by doing all auras, and that basically lets you do a lot more precise stuff like this, like something between 40% and 25%. And you can do the same thing, like if you're a druid with Innervate, or a priest with Hymn of Hope, things like that. You can do the power percentage with that, so you know that you can also do a trigger as action available, Innervate or Hymn of Hope, or Siphoned, or whatever you want to do. Not Siphoned, I'm thinking of the other one, the Shadow Fiend guy, the guy that restores your mana. Anyways, but you could add a trigger for that as well, and then it would only display if you can actually do that. So let's go on to the next one down here. It's just a single trigger one, and it's just the power. I changed to the operator to less than or equal to 25%. This is the one that's a little more intrusive. It's red, so the eye sees red before it sees any other color. And I don't know why these are still on. And then it starts calling me a name. So it gets my attention more. It lets me know, hey, it's really time to live tap now. Alright, and that's basically text auras. Let me actually go down here and show you an event aura. Now, water spout is something Shaw of Fear does, and this is a good example of doing a non-party member trigger and an event trigger. So this is an event trigger, and there's a different type of event triggers, like I was going over before, the chat message, the combat log, or when something becomes cooldown ready. For this particular instance, it's a combat log, and I'm tracking a spell when it starts. And you can kind of like just look at these different options, and they're pretty self-explanatory. You want to kind of see, like, if it's periodic spell, or when someone swings, or when someone dies, if a spell is building up, or if it's, if there's a damage shield that missed, or if the damage is split between things, or it's a bunch of different capabilities there. I've just started getting used to doing events, so it's not something I'm 100% familiar with, but these are pretty strong in what you can do with them. I mean, you can pretty much check the combat or chat log for anything and make that into a trigger. Alright, and then for the message suffix, I wanted it to be the cast start for this particular one. You could do a cast failed or a cast success. Like if you wanted to see something with it, like an interrupt or something, you could do a cast success, and then if you successfully interrupted something, it would display then. And then there's other ones here too, like spell failed or things like that. Like interrupt, I guess, would be that one. But I did cast start for this, and I'll explain in a minute here. And then the source name, that's just something that Shaw of Fear does in the heroic encounter. Once you get to the Dread Expanse, he starts doing an ability called Water Spout, and it hits pretty hard, and if you're not paying attention, you'll probably die from it. So I needed something that would alert me for when he's casting Water Spout, because there's no, like, it's a very small visual. It's hard to see unless you're looking for it. So I needed something to yell at me and say, hey, you need to look at this, because it's going to be happening. And that's why I did cast start instead of cast success. Because cast success, it's basically when I start displaying it when the cast is finished, and that it successfully finished. I wanted a little bit more of a heads up, so I did it whenever it started casting, because it is like a 1.5 second cast or something like that. So it takes some time for it to actually start happening, but this kind of gives me the heads up by doing cast start instead of cast success. And then I just came down here, source name is Shaw of Fear. I think you can probably actually leave this out, and then whenever anybody starts doing the spell name of Water Spout, it'll show that. That's what I would think would work, but I tried that with Death Blossom and it didn't work, so I'm not 100% sure on that. But I did the source name as Shaw of Fear, and the spell name as a Water Spout. For this particular thing, you can't put the spell ID. You have to actually type out the spell name, because they're looking for the combat log. They're looking in the combat log, and they would need to see Water Spout. So you type exactly what you want them to find. And then that's going to be the trigger. Now with event triggers, it's very important on this bottom part to put a duration in here. If you do not put a duration, then this thing will pop up and it will stay up forever until you open WeakAuras and close WeakAuras again, which you can't do in combat. So it's very, very important to put a duration in here. It's extremely important. I can't stress that enough. Do not just put it on custom. You have to put it on timed and put a duration in there. And this is just a text aura. It's the same way as everything. And I just put in there's water spout. I changed the text color, I have it outlined. ElvUI combat text, really big, really high frame strata. So this is going to appear above everything. Like everything that's also occupying this space is going to be under this this aura. So that's how you can. That's an example of an event trigger. And like I said, these are very strong in what they can do because everything goes through the combat log, and it looks like it can track pretty much anything that's happening in the combat log for the most part. So there's a lot of possibilities with this. I'm going to be playing around with them a lot more now that I know kind of how to use them. But that's the basics on an event trigger. Okay, so this is actually a good point to move over to the Actions tab, because I do have a couple of actions set up for this as well. So let's go ahead and click over to Actions, and this is basically an optional thing you can do to the aura to basically perform an action when the aura shows and when the aura goes away. You can do both or one or the other, or none. But for this one, when it's showing, I had a chat message happen in the raid warning channel, so that it pops up and yells it at the raid as well, water spouts, and then I have it playing a sound as the warning sound, which is just a little voice that says warning, and it plays it through the sound effects channel. You can change it through the ambience and masters. You can change the volume. That's actually really cool that you can do that. Button glow is like you can actually have it start glowing on something, like the default Blizzard thing. Like if you want to, like like when Blizzard wants you to use a certain spell, like if your affliction hits Soulburn, like some of the things that are affected by Soulburn, they get this cold glow around them. That's what this does, the button glow. It'll put that glowy stuff around them. The important part is that you don't want, like, the glow action, you can show and hide. So when on the hide option here, you want to make sure you turn it off, unless you want it to stay on. You have to remember that you do have to turn that off. So like if you're having your player friend glow or something, you can make almost anything glow. Like you can come here and choose. I can choose these data panels, these buttons over here, this part of WeakAuras, the chat box, these data text, players, a button, the certain aura. You can have a lot of different things. Sure, you can have the targets, frame, flash, but you just have to remember you do want to turn it off on the hide. I mean, if you do want to turn it off, you need to actually turn it off. And then there's custom too, so if you know some custom coding, you can do that as well. But it's just a little bit of an extra bonus thing you can kind of do with the on show and on hide parts of the aura. So when it starts displaying, it does something. When it stops displaying, it does something. You could do this for something like, you can have this just do a chat message and /say. Or you can have this, do it this way too, BG raid party say, and it'll do it in that order. If you're in battleground, it'll do it battleground raid, it'll do it in raid party and say and say. And then you can have it, say Dark Soul active, and then when it on hide, you can have it say Dark Soul finished, or whatever you want to put in there. And it's kind of like the add-on RSA, if you're familiar with that. Races, spell announcer, or Reese's, or they don't actually do the add-on anymore, somebody else, but RSA is an add-on that basically says like, I interrupted this thing. You can have things like that happen and not have to have another add-on do that. You can have WeakAuras do that for you. You have to set it up though, and the other add-on is more convenient because it's already set up for you. But you can do more customized stuff with this, and that's the kind of things you can do with actions. Let's look over to the load tab now. Let's actually go to something that is only loaded on a certain time, like the breading embers here. Now, a load is basically going to determine when an aura is allowed to display. And you can actually specify, a lot of different things. Like you can say it's only allowed to display when you're in combat, or when you're not in combat. You can have it never display, like if you want to turn it off for now, you can click never, and it'll never display. You can do it by player name, you can do it by player class, talent specialization of that class. If the talent's selected, like if a certain talent is selected, you can do it, like if you look at the talent frames, and let me move this over here. So like this is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, etc. And you can actually go down here and say, well, I only wanted this order to display if I've got the tier 3 second talent selected and active, and then it'll only display if that talent's active or selected. You can do it based on player level. You can do it in zone, specific zone you're in, an instance type. Like you can do, if you're in an arena, a raid, 5-man dungeon. If you're not in a dungeon, like only display if you're not in a dungeon, or if you're in a scenario or 10-man raid, 25-man raid. You do dungeon difficulty, like challenge or heroic, or looking for raid, or none, or normal. And you can do it based on your role. You can do it like if you're a hybrid class, and you can do damaging and healing, or tanking and healing, or whatever it is. You can have them display based on what role you currently are. And you can actually specify that as well. So it's really neat to be able to control when these things are actually going to display. Alright, and then that's basically loads in a nutshell. So animations are the other part. So like when something is flashing and things like that, it's basically animations. They're really self-explanatory. I always use presets. You can do customs, and that gives you a lot more options. I think it's too many options personally, but you can do different presets, and like I usually have them fade in or grow, and then as the main one I have them flashing or pulsing. There's some other options too, and you can play around with that. These are all really preference things. Like I can have this as shrink if I wanted to, and that way like you can kind of see how it would look by turning it on and off. It's going to grow and flash and shrink as you turn it off. And that's what you can kind of do with animations. So that's basically all the things with WeakAuras, at least that I can remember, with what we can do. That's going to pretty much conclude the video. So, if you have any questions, you can feel free to leave a message either in the video, in the comments below, or you can send a message to the YouTube account here, the Progression Guild. I do try to get to those in a timely manner. Sometimes it does take a little bit longer to get to, depending on how busy I am at that time. I like to think I'm able to get back to people within a day or two. If it is longer, I do apologize, but sometimes I do just get busy and don't have time to log in and check those right away. But I will get back to you eventually. I always respond to everybody, unless you're asking a stupid question. There aren't many of those, but some people manage to find a way to ask a stupid question, and I usually ignore those. But if your question is relevant, even if it's been answered before, I do respond to you and let you know, and try to help you out in any way I can. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. We've cleared out Tier 14. We just finished our Heroic Elite Protectors. The video's up, and Heroic Shot of Fear as well. So you can go check out those videos if you want, and subscribe to our channel for updates on new videos that are coming out. We are actually in the process of trying to build a rated battleground team as well, so we might start seeing some PvP videos coming out very soon, depending on if and when those get started. And those are more videos you can see. We're excited about Tier 15. We're really looking forward to trying to get server first for Tier 15. We were pretty close on Tier 14, but we had some setbacks that kind of screwed us over. One of our healers kind of jumped ship without really telling anyone, and we were like, it basically set us back almost 2 weeks. And we missed server first by about a week, so if that didn't happen, we probably would have eked out with server first, but we're hoping to get it this time around. And subscribe to the channel for notifications on when those videos come out. Alright, as always, thank you for watching, and thank you for your support and comments, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in our videos. Even though I don't really see you, I just kind of see your comments. But I do appreciate all the comments, and I do read them all. I might not respond to them all, but I do read them all. And if there are questions, I do respond to them. But I do appreciate the comments and appreciate the views. You guys are great. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.